Hi, welcome to the second annual Inclusion Fusion Disability Ministry Web Summit presented by Key Ministry and PajamaConference.com. My name is Jeff Davidson, and I'm with Rising Above Ministries, which is an outreach ministry to the special needs community that my wife and I started based upon our own experiences being the parents of a child with special needs. And I want to talk to you today not just about why it's so important to include families like ours in your church, but also help you understand the differences between men and women, fathers and mothers, as it relates to this journey that we're all going on down this path of being a family with a child with special needs. Because there's some profound differences that affect our relationships. It affects how we do everything. In fact, when you first get a diagnosis, when you first begin to come to terms with the fact that you have this child with special needs, the reality is it affects everything you do. Your entire world is turned upside down. There's not a single segment or aspect of your life that is left untouched by this new role in your life of being the parent of a child with special needs. From the moment you get up to the moment you go to sleep, every single aspect of your life is dramatically changed. And the way women and men respond to that can vary tremendously. You know, the reality is today that a lot of studies are showing that over 80% of children with special needs are now being raised by single female caregivers. We have virtually an entire generation of children with special needs where dad has checked out and dad is no longer in the picture. And that affects this journey in so many ways. So we have to realize, first of all, this is a profound change in the life of that mom and dad. And typically what we see happening, mom immediately throws herself into taking care of the child. Mom mobilizes like she's going to war. Mom begins 24/7 researching treatments and therapies and ways to help the child and what are the latest studies that are out there and interacting with other people and researching. On the other hand, men tend to get locked into denial at first. We're not sure what has happened. See, men are fixers. Men love to fix things. Men feel in their pride like given an opportunity, given a problem, we can solve anything. We can fix anything. And all of a sudden, we've been given this child with special needs, and we can't fix this, and we just can't make it go away. And so for a man, he doesn't know what to do next. He's literally paralyzed because he's got a situation that frustrates him because he doesn't know how to fix it. Meanwhile, mom's going about her business and mom's carrying on and trying to get things in line and in order. And dad is still dealing with this denial and this wrestling with the fact that he can't fix this. And so what we see happening is we see dads begin to disengage and dads begin to withdraw. And when dad begins to withdraw and dad begins to disengage, that just heightens the tension between the two in the couple. And mom feels even more of a burden, like she's been left alone to do this by herself. And it adds to her frustration and it changes the dynamic of that relationship. You see, we all are familiar with the grief process. And when you have a child with special needs, you go through a very similar grief process. It begins originally with that initial shock and denial. And what we see happening a lot of times through our own interactions and through our own life, we see that the male tends to stay in this period of denial and shock a lot longer than the female, because the female immediately moves to the next step in that process, which is pain and guilt. And here again, we find a difference between men and women. Men tend to skip right through that pain and guilt period. But for a lot of women, for a lot of moms, they struggle with, did I do something to cause this? Is God punishing me? Did I, perhaps in my past, is there a reason why this happened this way? And mom is struggling for answers, and mom is wrestling with this enormous guilt sometimes. But dad has moved straight through guilt into anger. And here's the problem. A lot of times, unfortunately, the men tend to stay in this anger stage. They're looking for someone to blame. They're feeling that pain and they're angry and they're upset And we have a very difficult time sometimes getting the men to move on through those stages to the point of acceptance. So, what you have going on in a relationship is you have a mom who, unfortunately, sometimes lingers with that pain and guilt and then moves into isolation and loneliness. And mom withdraws. She already feels like her family and friends don't get it, they don't understand it. And so she begins to feel all alone and all isolated. And if we're not careful, she ends up dwelling in this cave of isolation where she pulls the blinds and she doesn't want to come out. But at the same time, we have a dad who's either in denial or anger over the whole situation, and that leads to a volatile relationship. And what we've seen at Rising Above is this process never goes away. There's a lot of psychology out there that says once you go through this grief process, once you get to the point of acceptance, then everything's okay. And what we have found in our lives as special needs parents is you're going to go through this grief process over and over and over through different stages of your life. Perhaps it's different milestones when your child hits a certain age or a certain time when they should be doing certain things, but they can't because of their disability or their special need. It's going to trigger some of this grief process again, and you're going to go over and over it. So part of that relationship, part of that dynamic is understanding where each person is coming from, and in what they say and what they do and how they react, understanding where they are at that time in that grief process. For example, my own son has autism and cerebral palsy. He's completely nonverbal, and he has difficulty walking and with mobility. He can't do any of that without assistance. We have to pretty much provide 24/7 care for him around the clock in all situations, whether it's bathing him, feeding him, and in my new reality, shaving him. Now that he's turning into a teenager, I'm faced with the reality that I'm going to have to shave my son. Well, with his autism, he doesn't like being touched in the face. He has sensory issues, and that will disturb him tremendously. But I, as his dad now, have to figure out, how am I going to shave my son's face? And in dealing with that, I went back through all those stages of grief again as I had to mourn that particular milestone and that new piece of reality. And so that's why at Rising Above, we have created what we call the dark side rule. And everywhere we go, whether we're talking to dads or moms or especially couples, we explain the dark side rule because I believe it's a vital thing that you need to learn and grasp in order to make it as a couple, in order to survive. And the dark side rule simply says, there are going to be days, there are going to be times when one of us is going to go over to the dark side, where one of us is going to go and grieve and perhaps be down and frustrated and angry and depressed all over again. The dark side rule says that's okay. You're going to do that. But if you're going to do that, then the remaining spouse, the other person in the relationship, has to stay strong. That person cannot go to the dark side with you. Because in our flesh, in our humanity, we want, misery loves company. We want that person to commiserate with us. We want that person to wallow with us in our self-pity. But that can't happen. One person's got to stay on the other side and be the lifeline that throws you the rope to pull you back out of the dark side. And that's why we say you can't go to the dark side for more than 24 hours. Because if you do, you're going to want to linger and stay there. So somebody has to stay strong and be the lifeline and pull you back. In our own relationship, my wife and I, when we experience this, we are passionately determined not to go to the dark side at the same time. Sometimes we'll even say, hey, today's my day to be on the dark side. Leave me alone. So you need that person in your life. And if you're not married, if you don't have a spouse, you've got to find a friend. You've got to find somebody who's walking the same walk, going down the same journey with you, facing the same challenge, who gets it and who will be that lifeline for you. One of the things I hear so often from moms of children with special needs or moms of children with disabilities is they're frustrated because dads oftentimes are not as engaged, not as involved as they would like them to be. And some of that goes back to what we talked about earlier with dads being fixers, and now they're confronted with something they can't fix. But a lot of that is something that the mom can help with simply by teaching us how to engage, teaching us how to be involved, not telling us. There's a difference, but encouraging and teaching us. You need to show us simple ways that we can be more engaged, that we can be more involved. And I think that's so important that the wife help the father realize that. Because dads are not nearly as sociable creature as moms. It's not surprising to find a dad who's never told anybody at his work that he has a child with a disability. Guys just don't talk about that. Women are more social and feel more at ease sharing the burden, sharing what's going on. And so we've got to find ways to help equip dads. And one of the ways that I'm so passionate about doing that is we have to help fathers of children with special needs understand one simple truth. This was not an accident. Nobody's being punished. God didn't turn his back and come back with a soft drink from the fridge and go, whoa, when did that happen? No, the reality is you were chosen to be the father of a child with special needs. You were called to do this. This is God's calling on your life. God set you apart before you were ever born. God wrote down in his book all the days of your life, and God dictated that this would be the journey that you would go on. And so we've got to convince them that they are called, that they are chosen in order to get them committed to what they've been called to do. And part of doing that is convincing them of the second reality, which is your child is fearfully made. Your child is created for a plan and a purpose. Your child has a destiny to glorify God. And you've got to come to realize that and believe that and stake everything on that. And when you do, it's a major watershed moment in your life when you come to realize that this was not an accident, that not only was I chosen for this, not only was I called for this, but God has a reason for this. God has a plan in this, and I have been called according to his purpose, and God's going to do something incredible in my child's life. And we believe that with all our heart because it says so right in Scripture. A beautiful passage in the 9th chapter of John where Jesus and his disciples are walking along, and the Scripture says they come across a man born blind. And one of the disciples says, Jesus, is he born this way because he did something wrong? Or is it because his parents messed up? Because we're always looking for somebody to blame. We always want to find somebody to blame for what happened. And Jesus looks right at him and says, it was neither of those two. He was born this way so that the glory of God, the work of God, could be on display in his life. And when as a father of a child with special needs or a mom, when I come to realize that my child was born this way because God is telling a story and God is using this for his glory and his honor, and I've just got this part to play, it makes all the difference in the world. Because we begin to understand that God is telling God's story. And God is telling a story that began before we ever came on the scene, and it ends long after us. And this journey that we're on, this path that we're on with this child, this is just part of God's story. And we have to realize the story of our own life doesn't even include us. We're not even the main character. God is doing something here. God is doing something of epic proportions for his glory and honor. And the suffering that you endure, the pain that you bear, the challenge that you face, the journey that you go down is all part of what God has called you to do for the greater telling of his redemptive story, to bring him glory and honor. One of the most meaningful and powerful things that we can do as the church, that we can do as ministry leaders to equip and help these families is help them with two realizations, and that is by being the parent of a child with special needs, you have the most incredible gift right in front of you, and that is the gift to understand the true nature and character and love of God. You know, one of the biggest things that we can do as a church, that you can do as a church or a ministry leader, is help show these families, help show these parents that they have been given the most incredible blessing, that they've been given the most incredible gift and opportunity to truly grasp, to truly realize, to truly understand the grace and love of God through this special needs child. You see, I used to be so into myself and so about my own life and my own world and my own selfishness. And then I was given the blessing of this son with special needs. And through him, I have learned that I love him with the most incredible, unconditional love. I don't love him because of what he does. I don't love him because of what he achieves. I love him just the way he is because he's my son. And if he's never anything but my son, that's all I need. That's all I want. And because of that, I now understand, I now grasp that that's my relationship with God, that God loves me unconditionally, not for what I do, not for what I've done or what I can bring to the table for him. He loves me simply because I'm his son. And because of that, I have learned to be completely and utterly dependent upon him for all things. You know, my son requires our 24/7 care. My son relies on us for his every need. And that doesn't bother him. He's happy, he's joyful, he's content because he knows that I'm going to take care of him, that I'm going to give him his every need. And that's the way it is with God. Folks, we can show these families, you can show families like mine, that God can redeem this situation, that God can reclaim this whole journey, and God can use it for enormous good, for enormous blessing. We can show these families that this is going to be, we can show these families that this is going to be the most incredible blessing that you could have received. You know, the theme for this year's Inclusion Fusion is why. Why should churches be more intentional in their outreach to families like mine? Why should churches be more involved in including children with special needs in their programs and ministries? Can I share something? When I first began this journey, when I first began this walk, my faith was incredibly important to me. And yet what I found, what I realized, was that even my own church at the time was woefully unprepared and inadequate in meeting our needs. There was a pivotal moment in our family's life where our church did a massive children's production for Christmas. They did this big musical thing to entertain and to bless folks at Christmas. And even though I was in leadership at the church at the time, no one even thought of including my own son. No one even came up with a plan or a way to involve my son in this children's program because they didn't know how, and they were afraid of what the impact would be on the program. See, I don't believe for a minute that churches are deliberately intending to not reach out to families like mine. The reality is they simply don't know how. And in not knowing how, perhaps they don't understand the why. That's why every time a survey is done of special needs families, and they ask them, what is the most intolerant place, the most intolerant institution or organization for families like you? You know what the number one answer is? The church. And that just breaks my heart. Because that has to be the number one place where families like mine can find hope, where they can find resources, where they can find community, where they can find love and acceptance and compassion that says you have a place here and you have a place in God's kingdom. I've always said that not only was I called and chosen to be the dad of a child with special needs, but I believe my calling in life is to be his ambassador to families like mine, to be His messenger to the special needs community. See, these are my people. This is not something I've just read about. It's not something I've just studied. It's not something that I know from a book. I've lived it. I've experienced it. These are my people. And my people are dying. Emotionally and mentally and spiritually. My people are dying. And we're putting our hope and our life in your hands. And we're asking you, the church, to find a way to bring us into your family, to reach out to us, to be the hands and the feet and the arms of Jesus, and wrap yourselves around us and let us know that we're not alone and that there's a plan and a purpose for this, and that this whole situation can be redeemed for the glory and honor of God. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and this platform here at Inclusion Fusion. Hope you've been blessed.